Good morning. Good morning. There is a microphone if you think I need it, but seeing as we're in the echo chamber, I think we'll be fine. So, and I'll also warn you that I'm a little bit cranky this morning. So, it has nothing to do with Connecticut. I promise. It was lovely. The weather was delightful. Anyway, so I want to talk to you this morning about the library's conversation, but rather than just jumping in knee-deep into the concepts, I want to talk to you about why I think we need to talk about the library's conversation. And I noticed, for example, that looking through the program, there's a little bit of stuff on Web 2.0 and Library 2.0. And so that's where I want to start, because actually that's where this library's conversation started, which was there was a lot of legislative and policy movement afoot on social networks at the federal and at the state level. What do we do about MySpace? What do we do about Facebook? What do we do about online predators who lie in wait on web pages to prey on our weakest and hold them from the pack and things of that nature? And as we looked at it, what we found was this. This actually, not this literally, this is Information Architects. These folks took web trends, trends in the web from 2007 and mapped it on the Tokyo subway map. So all of you who have been in Tokyo, go, of course. And it shows exactly how easy and intuitive Web 2.0 is to keep track of. And so, you know, each color, we got sharing, and we got tools, I told you I was cranky, and technology, and you know, you follow it all along. It's a really clever display of information, but I think it also does a great job of explaining exactly why you guys are so paranoid and frustrated by coming to these conferences sometimes, which is everything's 2.0, but everything is 2.0, so what do you pay attention to? What's important? What do you care about? And so when we looked at this, we didn't make anything as elegant, but when we started this process of what is social networking, what is its impact in libraries, what we ended up doing was the really bad dictionary. You know, it's, oh, this is what a mashup is, and this is what an API is, and this is what Ajax is, and this is what that is, and that's what Flickr is this. And what we did is we looked at it and we said, this is nuts. This is nuts. What is it that holds these things together? What is it that makes sense of these things together? And we looked at it, we came up with a concept, but I just want to acknowledge for a moment that you have every right to be frustrated when you look and hear that you should be a 2.0 world and keep up. Because it is frustrating. It's all over the map. So I want to talk a little bit about, and before I go too much further, I said I'm cranky, it's true, but I'm also not a technophobe. This isn't an anti-technology conversation, but it's not what I want to emphasize. We can talk tech, and I can work your Ajax magic, it's great. But I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the larger context in which we fit in. Hopefully we'll have time to have a conversation afterwards. And I want to start by talking about waves. I was at an unconference up in Syracuse, and we started talking about the future of technology in libraries. And this analogy came up about catching waves versus being the wave machine. And one thing that I'm really worried about when I look around at librarianship today is I see a lot of the former and not so much of the latter. And what do I mean by that? It's like the joke about the French philosopher who says, you know, find out where that mob is going so I may get in front of them and lead them. There's a lot, I think our profession is really at a point where it becomes very susceptible to trying to find out what the next great thing is and trying to be part of it. And I think I was talking with some doctoral students, I was teaching a seminar, and I said something to that effect, and they said, so what you're saying is that the profession is very easily swayed by strong personalities. And I said, yeah, we get a lot of people up there and give you blah, 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 and this is the way we should go. And we're like, okay, we'll go this way, okay, we'll go this way. And we get torn a lot. And I think a lot of that is because we're so busy trying to figure out what's the next best thing that we forget what do we care. I mean, what do we care? Why is it that when Google comes out with the next thing, we go, why is it that when we hear about Twitter, we feel we got to go Twitter? Why is it that we feel like we have to subscribe to 58 RSS feeds per hour? Why is that? And by the way, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but I want to know why. I got to be careful, because in the virtual reference days, I made some comment to the effect of, why do we do a reference interview? I really want to know because I want to know when we can do it, how we can do better. And everyone sort of, that became the Dave hates the reference interview. It's horrible. No, that's not true. I like the reference interview. I just want to know why I do it. My favorite, Sarah Weissman once said that the reference interview is putting a patron on a rack until they tell you the truth. That's it. So I'm going to pick on Web 2.0 for just a little bit more, and I want to show you a. This is, since we're talking about waves, and I know you can't read it all, but just you get the impression. This is Gartner Group a while ago, a couple of years ago, decided they weren't very satisfied with the adoption charts, this wonderful bell curve which talks about innovators and laggards and early adopters and mature and all this other stuff. They said that doesn't quite capture what's going on. So they came up with this adoption chart. And what it is it's like a hype cycle, is what they call it. And what happens is things sort of percolate, and get up to this maximum hyperbole, where it's going to change and save the world. And then, so technology trigger, what we start doing, peak of inflated expectations, right? Microfiche will save the universe. Wow, what a radical idea, let's put romance novels in the stack, right? We've all seen these things. And then we enter into the trough of disillusionment. It's not my terms. And then we go to the slope of enlightenment, and finally we end up at the plateau of productivity. What that means is, when something's new, we think it can do everything. We figure it can't do everything, but eventually we figure out what it can do, and that's what we move ahead with. Now, what's interesting is this graph is from 2006. And you'll see that Web 2.0 is literally at the peak of inflated expectations. I would argue that in 2.0, you probably already felt it. We're sort of headed in this direction. I mean, Dave's presentation sort of says where it's going. I'd love to be able to smooth that out, but I don't think I can. So what's going on here? What are we talking about the waves? And so this is where I get really cranky. So I'm mad as hell, so I'm not going to do it. I spent a year, I've been on leave, right? So this is why I'm in jeans and don't have a tie, because I'm on sabbatical. So lucky I showed up not wearing pajamas. And what I've been doing with that year is taking these wonderful 30,000-foot pie-in-the-sky academic concepts of the libraries conversation, and I've been spending a lot of time in libraries and library schools talking about how do we make this real and what's the reality of it. And I'll tell you, it's a really enlightening experience. I don't know how often you guys get to sort of travel and see other libraries, but you should do it. And I would also recommend that you spend some time in library schools at the same time. Particularly if you're hiring them, you might want to know what's going on in them. And what really frustrates me is that I don't think that we have a really clear, keen understanding of the business that we're in. And it's starting to show. And it's starting to show in, frankly, some embarrassing ways. And so I asked the question, are we in the same business as Google? Are we in the same business as Google? Yes, no? No. All right, no. I don't think we are, by the way. I don't think we are at all. I think that if you want to be, I always hated that campaign of librarian the best search engine. No, you're not. If you can throw 30,000 pieces of crap at someone in 2.5 microseconds, you'll be the best search engine. Is this really the competition we want to set up for ourselves? Oh, look, 30,000 entries on apples. Yay! Right? Google, by the way, what business is Google in? Pop quiz. Advertising. It's the world's biggest advertising agency. That's right. Whatever they can do to draw eyeballs to advertising, that's the business they're in. So we're not fundamentally in the same business. What about Amazon? Are we in the same business as Amazon? No, but they have books.
Books for sale.
Books for sale. I don't care if they... well, they're books, right? They're also in yard work and gardening and music, Right? Now, I think these are we in the same business as Sears? Oh, great, you threw a bringer. You ever broken a toaster? You can call up Sears and say, my toaster's broken, and they'll do a reference interview for you, and they'll come up with some resource solution. But we don't look at Land's End, and we don't look at help desk and say, oh, competition. We're in competition. But I hear a lot of this. We're in competition with these people. And I think that we need to spend some time figuring out what differentiates us. And the notion that we can learn from these folks, that's fine, but let's not mistake the idea that we're in the same business. Call center. Are we in the same business as schools? Now that's an interesting question. Are we in the same business as schools? if any academic librarians, I think you would argue that you probably are literally in the business of being in school, right? Public schools, yeah, I don't know. I mean, school librarians, you guys are in schools, right? Hello, right? But what about public libraries? Well, if you ask our friend Melville Dewey, he says absolutely, you're a co-equal learning institution to public libraries. Now that's 100 years ago, but some ideas move forward. Are we in the same business? Actually, this question is, are ILS vendors in the same business that we're in? And we can talk about that. But it makes me mad because, first of all correct answers, congratulations, but I don't think everyone has them. And so I was at this meeting, and I was at this meeting in a Ivy League university somewhere near Cambridge. And they had this wizened author who got up and said, you know, imagine one day that you have a portable electronic reader, that you have an e-reader, but it's actually easy to read, and it's ubiquitous, and everything's been digitized. Doesn't that radically change the world of books and libraries? To which I said, it certainly radically changes the world of books. But I'm not sure about libraries. And an interesting thing is I was not alone. And what frustrated me is that you know, like there were 8 librarians ganging up on this one poor professor type. And no one had the story straight. I mean, it's like watching sports, and you know, this guy's playing hockey and this one's basketball, and they're all in the same field. Right? That I don't think we necessarily have a unified feel for what is this business. If we know what we're not in, we know what we shouldn't chase. Do we know what we are in? And unfortunately, a lot of when I look around, I think sometimes people think that we're in the thing business. Right? And so what do I mean by the thing business, and how do I say it? My son. This is how I get the audience on my side every time. But if you look at this, and if I didn't say my son, it's a picture, right? And so we look at this and we say it's a picture, we're going to put it in our digital library, and what are we going to do with this thing? What do libraries do with pictures? We do with it what we do with everything else, which is we add metadata to it. So, first of all, a lot of metadata, this is EXIF metadata, meaning it actually comes in the image when you're taking this picture. Did you want that one? Yeah. It's actually storing all this stuff. So we have metadata, that's great, but we know that metadata is useless. You know, the idea of it's dots per inch and all that other stuff. So we don't worry, we have descriptive metadata. We will add the Dublin core. Dublin core will save the world. Because now that we have Dublin core, everything's okay. But, you know, our systems can't really deal with Dublin core, so we'll go ahead and throw a MARC record at it. And if a MARC record doesn't do it, we'll throw mods at it. If mods doesn't do it, we'll throw an OAI, and then we'll throw TEI, and then we'll throw, oh, we're going to have a tag cloud. We'll put a tag cloud on. And suddenly we're in the job of having like 58 gigabytes of metadata for every 2K of item that we have, right? Why is this? Why is this? Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to warp what things are. We're trying to believe that the world is about discrete bits of knowledge. We're trying to believe. So David Weinberger, who wrote the book Everything is Miscellaneous, talked about the notion of he's in a meeting and people are nodding and someone mentions the Telecommunication Act, and so they go on the Wikipedia and they read about the Telecommunication Act, and now they can be more engaged in the conversation. They have learned like that, and so it's a better, interesting conversation, which I sort of said, wait a minute. Who put the Wikipedia up? What did they know about telecommunications to begin with? How was it organized? How did they know to go to Wikipedia? How did they find? There's a connection here. That knowledge, that information, that knowledge, that learning is about connections, is about relations. It's not about things. So no amount of metadata will tell you that this is my son. This is on my graduation day when I got tenure, so I was happy, right? This is his brother. You know, this is a more recent picture of both of them, but here's where they were as babies so that you can find it cute. That is a relationship. And no matter how much metadata you put with this thing, you're not going to understand that relationship. So I say if we're in the thing business, by the way, being books, being videos, being web pages, being whatever they are, if we believe that we can take the world, break it into discrete, describable chunks, throw it into some system, and somehow knowledge will emerge from it, you are insane. And we've spent 100 years trying to do this. And when you go to session after session and look at the idea of somehow wringing blood out of the metadata stone that we can get more information out of it, it's absurd. This notion that somehow Ferber will save us, we need to work on that idea. So I'll give you another example about what's the alternative. This is, I'm going to do Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, all right? This is the entire bibliographic record from OCLC's WorldCat. You can read it at your leisure. So this isn't just the first screen. This is, I took the whole screen, okay? This is what the Onondaga County Public Library has about it. What's the difference between the two? The big yellow area is the holdings. It's on the third floor. It's on this screen. Here is the National Library of Australia. Here is the Library of Congress. And now, how many people have been where you start with the catalog sucks, and you quickly move to it needs to be more like? And the words that almost inevitably come out with is Google or Amazon that take you back to a business school. And that almost turns into it's got to be easier, it's got to be faster, it's got to be less complicated. Ready to see Amazon? That's Amazon. That's Amazon. What's going on here? Isn't this the idea that, you know, it's easier and simpler and better? Oh, it's all that marketing crap they put into it. Ready? That itty bitty little line that showed up is their branding and navigation bar. That next big bar is the sales information, which is really bibliographic information. What's the ISBN, what's the publisher, what's the cost? The next thing are sales recommendations. If you like this, you like that. Here is the quality reviews, book review, library journal. Then we have bibliographic data. And what's interesting, if you add this orange bar to that light blue bar, you're actually not that far off. So what else is there? Well, if you look at it, recommendations based on what you purchased before, open reviews, conversation. Because if you look at what's in those open reviews, some of it is about the book, but a lot of it is relating that book to other materials. If you like this, you like that. This was their second book. The first one was better. These kinds. What they're doing is putting relations in. Then we have Pathfinders. Remember what we did? Pathfinders. Oh, God. Then we have discussion tools. And way at the bottom, we have some additional marketing tools and data. All right? And you look at this and you go, wait a minute, what's going on here? By the way, you could look at this very easily and say, if we keep heading this way, this will be the 10 terabytes of metadata to every object. So it's not quite there yet. But what you're starting to see is conversation. You're starting to see people make sense of this information by talking, by reacting to reviews, by rating things. What's happening is people are going in and they're shaping this information. They're not simply consuming it. They want tools in which they can take this information and relate it to their lives, relate it to other information, relate it to other needs. By the way, if you think that I rigged the deck by picking Harry Potter because it's obviously really popular, here is J.J. Lankes. I have no idea it has a relationship. Who's a rather obscure woodcut artist. I think worked around here. And it was a book published in 1990. Right? This is not the hot bestseller, and yet still we're talking about customer reviews, discussion groups, pathfinders, citations. How much time have we as a profession spent in the front of the book? Think about it. How much of our job have we spent on the cover pages and the basic bibliographic data of authors? And how much of the really interesting thing is in the back of the book, which is how this is related to other things through citations? Those in the academic libraries realize that every year you get these panic-looking fifth-year professors walking in going, please God, give me tenure. And what they're looking for is citation data. Why? Because it shows impact. It shows how they fit into a larger conversation. And we go to our catalogs and we ignore the fact that there's a larger conversation going on. Books are influenced by other books, not just academic stuff. How many magical school books have come out since J.K. Rowling got around to them? And before, but we won't go into that. Right? So this notion that we're in the thing business is a problem. But if we're not in the thing business, and we're not Google's business, and we're not Amazon's business, what the hell business are we in? And why does it matter that we even answer that question? Why does it matter that we have to ask, what is our future? Why does it matter? Because if we can't answer the business we're in, we have a hard time answering what is the value beyond things. So when we do digitize it all, or when the councilman stands up and goes, why do we need a library when we have the internet? Or when the academic provost walks over and says, and how big is your budget this year? And when the principal says, you know, I'm not quite sure we can afford all this staff. Hey, look, here's a school librarian. If we can't answer these questions, how do we ultimately improve society? We've got a serious, serious problem. Either we innovate from our core principles, or we get very, very busy at being the second best. What do I mean by that? If you are chasing Amazon, if you are chasing Google, if you are chasing other people's waves, you will be the second best at something, invariably. If you are perfect, you will be the second best. Because if you're chasing Google, Google gets to win. Because Google is going to invent the next thing, and it will ultimately become the next thing for Google. So we can't just chase things. So if we don't understand core principles, we have to get very, very busy. So when you go to these conferences and you hear people stand up and say, you need to know this, and you need to know this, and you need to know this, and you need to know this, I would beg you to out loud, but at least in your head say, why? Not that the answer is, no, I don't need to know it, or no, I can ignore it, or I'm doing just fine, thank you very much. But why? Why do we need to know what Twitter is going to do next week? Do we really think that what Twitter does, do you want computer programmers who learned and cut their skills when they are 15 determining what the next strategic move for your library is? I was at the Department of Justice Law Library, and they were talking about how they couldn't get services on the IT environment because it was all locked down. The IT people wouldn't do it because security is important. But what their strategy was wait for a lawyer to do it first, put up a wiki, put up a blog, put up a this, and then it was okay for the library to do it. And my question back to them was, do you really trust lawyers to be the next strategic move that your library wants to make? All right? Be the wave machine, not the wave. So this is not, I want to emphasize, do everything like you normally do and don't think about it. I think we are at the brink of what we call the Dewey level shift. Clever, clever, thank you. I'm making buttons like that, that's all there is to it. I'm going to throw out buttons. I think that we in the library profession are now poised to radically change what we do and how we do it. If you think it's getting warm, you're right. I think that things like pressure for participation, which we can sort of explain theoretically in a little bit, but the idea that people now expect that when they come to an information system to help shape the information system will force us to change. When people could say, I like Amazon, what do they like? They like the ability to read reviews and they like the ability to participate. And when they come to our library catalogs and they put a query and we hand them 300 hits and say, good luck, that's not participation. The systems that we're putting out say, we know what's good, you take what we give you. And here's a question to ask. Do you in your library catalog assume that the user is stupid, that you are stupid? What do I mean? What happens when you get 0 results on a query? Do you put out a message that says, I'm sorry, we didn't find anything. Have you checked your spelling or asked a reference librarian? User is stupid. I'm sorry, we didn't find something, you must have messed up. Library is stupid. I'm sorry, we didn't find any queries. Would you like to access the interlibrary loan system? Meaning, we must not have had it, so here, go find it from someone else. What about a third option? Didn't find it? Add it. Right? Add it. And you go, what do you mean add it? Add a reference question right at the point of a 0 query and make that reference question right there. And the answer goes back in, so that when someone does the query again, it says, someone couldn't find it, here are the other terms to try, and it automatically links it. Right? Add it. I will search for this. I happen to be doing my PhD in this. I know that you have certain things. Here's what you need to know. Letting the users add information to the catalog? Heresy. Right? That's pressure for participation. Massive scale information. This is a whole other hour. I won't bother you with it, but it comes down to the fact that computers are getting really fast, really big, really quick. That what we're dealing with in the transportation sector, we realize that pretty soon every mile of road is going to generate a gigabyte of data per hour. That when I'm driving down here, I went through tolls. It knows where I am, it knows where I went. I was generating a black box in my car telling me how fast I was going and how my car was doing. I would see the commercials where your car can now email you how it's doing. Spam from your Lexus. Can you imagine you get an email in your Lexus, you know, with like mail enhancement? You're not good enough to drive me. Try this. Yeah, so many obscene jokes to get myself in trouble. All right. A gigabyte of data, right? The idea that right now when people pave, they're embedding RFID sensors into them to minimize the salting required. So you only come salt the hard roadway when it's frozen, thereby minimizing environmental impact. The environmental study, real-time traffic data, Google Maps, all this information about a freaking piece of asphalt, right? Now, what's your library going to do with a couple of terabytes, petabytes, exabytes, yottabytes of data on traffic? Right? And you go, oh no, not my problem. Well, when MIT opened their DSpace repository, their institutional repository, the first request they got was, can you put in my 10 terabyte data set from the satellite that we're running? Not, can I give you my nicely authored paper? Right? This data that we're in, a data-rich environmental world, what do we do when we never have to throw away a thing? Does anyone have Gmail here? Is anyone practically insulted when you empty your trash and it comes back and goes, why? If you're at Gmail and you empty your trash, it says something like, I got like 1,000 gigabytes of space for like not asking. And so when you throw it away, it goes, you don't have to do that. You know, please keep our marketing data around a little longer, but you know, and we're getting closer and closer to the knowledge creation process. When you look at online, the Chronicle of Higher Education had this editorial from an anonymous professor who told new professors seeking jobs not to blog. And he said for two reasons, one of which I agree with and one of which is just scary. One of which I agree with is if you're catty and you're doing gossip on your blog and you go to apply for a job and people can read that, they're going to assume you're catty and not want to hire you. Duh. Right? The other was because the academy only respects peer-reviewed finished pieces of literature, and by putting out this sort of froth of your thinking process, you diminish your standing. To which I say, 99.9% of what I do as an academic is that intellectual froth, of which 1%, if I'm lucky, will get published in a journal. Right now in the scientific disciplines, the journal publication is the archive. It's done, it's out there, it's thought about. Right? How do we live in a world when by the time we get this secondary piece of knowledge, this publication, it's over. It's done. And you say, oh, in academia, that's one thing, but what do you do with the kids? When you're capturing things in portfolios in a K-12 school, are you only capturing the finished projects, or do you want to capture the process to show critical information? And now with digital networks, increasingly you can capture that process. In public library, how many of you host discourses on youth violence or community development or urban sprawl or whatever it is, and you give them the room? And they go in and they have the meeting, and everything that happened walks out with them. Where's the community memory? Where is you capturing that so when next year you have the same discussion, you can start where you ended last year? All parts of our profession must be ready for radical change. So am I saying, oh, don't worry about Web 2.0? I'm not saying you're fine, don't learn another thing. I'm just saying you're going to have to learn a lot. We might want to prioritize what that is, right? So I think that ultimately the libraries are in the knowledge business. This is the business we're in. Google's not in the knowledge business. Google's in the advertising business, or they give them a bunch of stuff and let them worry about making it into knowledge business. I would argue that we are fundamentally in the knowledge business. And so if we're in the knowledge business, we better know a little bit about knowledge. And so a fellow by the name of Gordon Pask in the late 70s, a cybernetician, really sat down to figure out, he wanted to teach machines how to think, and he figured the best way was to figure out how people thought and they could transfer it over. And what he did is he discovered that knowledge is created through conversation. That when someone goes to learn, they do so through conversation. Now this is where I get in trouble, so let me clarify my terms. Stick with me a second. I can have a conversation one-on-one. Anyone go, oh, that's a conversation. This is a conversation. It's barely one-way conversation, but it's a conversation. When your library sits down to negotiate with a vendor and you develop a contract, it's a conversation. Right? Now, here's the one that people sometimes stumble on. When I'm sitting and reading a book and I'm debating with myself, do I buy this? Do I mean it? That's a conversation. You can have a conversation in your own head. Those of you in instruction are used to thinking this is metacognition or critical thinking. But conversation, what we have is this constantly going back and forth, testing, agreeing, and remembering what we agreed. So knowledge is created through this act of conversation. Libraries are in the knowledge business. Therefore, libraries are in the conversation business. Right? Now that's a different way of thinking, because we're not used to thinking that we're in the conversation business, but that's exactly the business that we're in. What do I mean by that? Well, go back to our examples. What about that citation in the academic library? What is citation? Joan Bechtel in the 80s wrote an article saying information instruction in libraries should be teaching people the scholarly communication. Should be teaching them that all these journals up here are really extended, lengthy, and formalized conversations. And if you understand that, you understand why citations matter, and you understand why peer review matters, and these things. That your library, by its very nature, is a conversation with the community. Every time you go up for a budget hearing and you talk about what is the value of your public library, you're in a dialogue, back and forth with the community saying, we need this, we need that because we can do this. Do we offer story hour? Do we offer knitting hour? Do we do gaming in a library? It should be an active conversation with your community. If not, you're trying stuff and throwing it against the wall and seeing if it sticks. All right? Knowledge or creating. Now, so how does this turn into practical? All right, Dave, we're at 30,000 feet, but get real. I got to do something tomorrow. This is something you can't read. I'm good with those slides. I went down to the Department of Justice, and originally the intention was they had to replace their catalog. So they said, what OPAC should we get now? Come talk to us about this stuff. Found out that they didn't replace their OPAC. In fact, they got rid of it. About 3 people would notice. They were all like, they were out, their library catalog was down for, ready? 2 months. Months. You know how many calls they got? Why? Well, why is it? What's the use of the catalog? They never really asked that. What it was is all the lawyers at the Department of Justice call their librarians and say, I need this. So the primary users of the catalog were the librarians. Or their paralegal staff would come in, and their paralegals were spending all their time in Westlaw and Lexis and Nexus and never touched the catalog. Or the economists, they had this great economists who really sat there and read every book that came in the library, knew it better than the librarians, right? So why do they need a catalog? So how do you plan for that? Well, what we started with is said, what conversations are going on in our organizations? And a conversation means what communities have. So we said, all right, we've got a bunch of lawyers talking about stuff. We've got a bunch of librarians talking about stuff. We've got a bunch of database vendors talking about stuff, primarily how to make money. We got a bunch of other legal sources in the sort of external world, and we've got the general internet talking about stuff. Can we, within that, map it out? So we went with the legal staff, and we found out that primarily lawyers have a 3-step process. It's much more intricate, but at a high level, they need to know what was legislative intent. So when they go to prosecute someone, they need to know what the law was meant by this word because it's ambiguous, so it's legislative histories, these kind of things. They then need to do a brief production, and a brief production means they take what they call the theory of the case, which is why this law applies, why this action should be taken based on this evidence. And then they need to know the life of the law. Was the law overturned? Were there precedents? These kinds of things. And so by understanding this way that this community is talking, not how that community is talking to the library, how that community is talking amongst itself, we can then begin to map what resources are useful at what stage in the process. So for example, in brief production, we do things like ad hoc reference services. When they come and ask us, we do it. A lot of expert witness research. In the criminal court, in the criminal side of justice, when they need to do some investigation, they call up the FBI and they come rough up people. It's fun. In the civil case, they have no such thing, so they use librarians as their investigative staff, which I think would be funny if they gave them guns and badges and sent them to rough out people, but they do. They go and they say, I need to know everything about this witness. I need to know everything about this chemical. I need to know, and suddenly the librarians are like the FBI agents of the civil division. It's brilliant, right? So how the pathfinders, matter databases, holdings, all of this maps. And by mapping out this process, you can begin to say, are there any dead ends here?
can we prioritize anything? I took this into a small college library. We started with, all right, what are the communities? All right, we've got faculty, we've got staff, we've got librarians, we have administrators, we have students, oh yeah. And we can begin to say, what are the conversations they're having? So the faculty are having the conversation about the core, meaning, what do we teach? And the question was, where's the library? If that's the fundamental, most important conversation the faculty is having, where's the library? That's a problem, right? Staff. Well, one of the major issues with staff is daycare. The question then the library can ask of itself is, can we solve that problem? Should we have impacts? Can we offer a daycare center? Now, people will always come back to me and say, so they get whatever they want. This is in essence the, should we have every public library, which is Danielle Steele and Indiana Jones movies, right? No, the library gets to make a decision about, should we do that? What should we prioritize? What's the biggest impact? Based on what needs of the community, but they gotta know what that is first. We'll get a little bit, well, let's jump into it. So we've been working with the Free Library of Philadelphia. The Free Library of Philadelphia has a 100-year-old building, and they're about to do a $175 million expansion to it, and they have to raise it all privately. Good day. And so part of what we've been doing is we've been thinking about what do we put in the new library, right? This idea that we roll out the plans and say, well, we'll put these books over here, put these books over here, put these books over here, and with compact shelving all over. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. You can't sell it, number one. But the other thing is the community doesn't care about it to a degree. So what do they care about? Well, what we did is we identified primary constituencies and important constituencies, and we're expanding the list, but we started with these. So we sat down with entrepreneurs and business people and we said, what does a business person need in a public library? And their answer was that they work for a big corporation. Absolutely not. I work for Pfizer, we've got a library. They said, but if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to start a business, even if you work at Pfizer, you need a lot from the library. But you know what I need from the library most of all? I don't need a book on how to start an auto shop. I need Kinko's FedEx. I need a production center. I need some place where, one, I can get out of the house because it's too crazy there. I need some place that can teach me basic computer literacy skills. I need some place that can help me put together a business plan, take me on field trips to successful businesses, mentoring programs, and I need a boardroom that I can pitch to venture capitalists. That's what I need in a public library. So we came up with this concept called the entrepreneurial. Now why? We also created a board that co-owns and co-directs it. Why? Because when we open it on day one and people walk in and say, San Francisco, right? Nicholas and Baker stops in and goes, where are the books? What we wanted, not for the librarians to stand up and go, what we wanted the business people to go, they're not here. And the reason they're not here is because we didn't want them. We didn't want them in our community library that supports us. Community ownership, a conversation about how do you do economic development turns into specific actions. Music center. We sat down with musicians and we said, what do you want? You know what the answer was? 2 grand pianos and a stage. We said, what? They said, one, you've got a huge collection of music already. First of all, the pop music scene's handled. They're in clubs, these things, we got CDs. The classical music, world music community has no place to go. And in the classical music community, we're not talking about a publishing system that is in trouble. We're talking about a publishing system that no longer exists. That you can no longer make a living as a composer because there's no place to publish the music and it's going to die. So what we need, number one thing musicians want is a place to perform. And we want that at our library because there aren't enough places in Philadelphia. And we said, well, all right, how about this deal? Would you allow it so that if you go put on the show, we get a copy of the score? Sure, there's no copyright issues, there's no place to publish it. Now I can capture this vital cultural resource in the public library. And when you go and do the performance, is it okay if we record it? Absolutely, that's fabulous. And can we stream it out? Sure, that's great. And suddenly, when you're interested in Philadelphia music, you can really see the life of the musician. You can see the life of the city. And you can see a conversation is, what do we think is important? How does it work? What's going on? The point of the music center is not that we thought it was a good idea. Trust me, when we sat down and brainstormed what it was, for us it was a quiet room with like a synthesizer that we could podcast from for 13-year-olds. And they said, 13-year-olds are fun. What we need is a place to do symphonies. What we need is a place to do new music. Writing center. We sat down with writers and said, what do you need? They said, we want a print-on-demand service. He said, can we do it as an imprint? Can we become the publisher? He said, no, we've been rejected by all the publishers. We don't want our public library protecting us too. So they said, what we want to do is come in, have a quiet space to write, and a salon where we can talk about it, and when we're done, we want to post our manuscripts online and let anyone print it on demand. And we want our 13-year-olds in the high school to come in and create literary magazines where they put these things together and publish their own literary magazines. So the notion of matching a community's conversation is not giving the community what we think it wants. It's building a direct one-on-one relationship with our community so they co-own this facility that we're working in, and it facilitates their needs and their conversations, not simply their book requirements or their materials requirements. So what do we learn from this? We learned that participatory librarianship, based on this, first of all, the user is in control. You've gone to enough things where you've heard about user-centered, probably, not spend some more time with academics. There's this migration from expert-defined system to we talk to users to come up with user-based system to I argue we're at the world where the users literally build the systems around themselves. Look at Flickr and Wikipedia and all these wonderful things and wonder why people use them, because there's actually very little thin film of functionality. It's actually not a very computer sciencey world they live in, but it allows them almost complete freedom to build their own interfaces to the world. Ask yourself in your library, where can the users build their own interfaces to the world? Right? In academic libraries, we used to give people study carrels. We do it from time to time, but now we just don't let them keep books of them because they might get stolen. Right? Where is it that they can create it? Where does that Connecticut history project from the local high school go? Does it go into the school library so it can be preserved? Is it put online? My mom, little Freudian slip, my wife formed something called a mom's club, which was all these mothers who were looking for things like, where can I get the, is this a good baby stroller to get to? I have an extra baby stroller to, can we get together for play dates to, let's go to the most, sort of moms. And they looked around and they said, it became from like 10 people to 50 people to now it's 300 people. And they said, we can't meet in anyone's living room anymore. And frankly, we can't meet at any given time anymore. We need to go online with this. We need to create a social network, not because it's cool and trendy, but because we have a social network that we want to facilitate. Why isn't the public library stand up and say, that's us, you want a listserv? We'll set it up. You do. Yay! It's all about learning. It's all about learning. What we do is about knowledge and learning, and that means it's active and participatory, and the idea of providing access to something is only one small part of what we should be doing. Yeah, go for it.
Would you go back to the floor?
Yeah. I have a button.
Okay. You highlighted 3
Yep.
participatory demands.
Yes. Out of the millions that are possible.
Well, right. So how many are you going to consider? Suppose I say, I want my children to be able to come to the library and read books at this time.
Yep.
Am I not going to be represented?
Good question. The short answer is, well, in Philadelphia, yes. The question was, why these and why not every other possible one? And her example was, I've got a place that I want my children to come after school and do reading. Can I not find a place here because we're not prioritizing that conversation?
And the possibilities are infinite.
They are.
When we're talking about how are you going to prioritize the living library in the future, how much weight are you going to give to sort of legacy programs and now participatory?
So let me ask you a question. Your public library?
Yes.
Do collection development?
Yes.
How do you pick the books?
Librarians are assigned to subject areas that read those.
What subject areas? What subject areas?
The Dewey areas.
All the Dewey areas. So they're equally conversant in all the Dewey areas.
No.
You know where this is going.
Yes.
Which is, by matching with the community, we need to let the community tell us which guides that we go into. So for example, this is the Central Library, which is in the urban core of Philadelphia, as opposed to lots of branch libraries all in suburbia, essentially.
So the overall program of the is the local.
Yes.
However you want to call it, whatever. We're not talking about existing for any other reason other than local people.
Philadelphia wants to be a world-class library that it wants to really guide the rest of the world. And so when they look at the Music Center, they want to highlight Philadelphia music, but they really want to look at this as a mechanism that they can serve the entire music world, because they feel as a community, this is what they want to highlight beyond just where they are. The answer to all of these questions is, I almost don't care which ones you pick, but I want the community to be able to stand up behind you and say, yes, that looks like us. And we have a situation where we're going to have to prioritize some conversation and not prioritize the others. And right now we do it. Every day, libraries make a biased decision. Bias is not an evil word, folks. It's called how we get through the world. We make decisions. I know, and it shouldn't be. But that's a whole other conversation, which is, I would tell you that it's impossible to be unbiased. It is possible to be balanced, but it is impossible to be unbiased. The communities need to be making this decision, which means I have to ask the question about what's the function we work with the communities. When I do this, talking about our catalogs and people submitting it, regularly I get the question about, oh great, so someone from Okinawa is going to come in and tag my books. And I say, why? Why do you feel that just because it's participatory or Web 2.0, it means the universe? What it means is we identify a community, we have a process where we regularly engage the community. Maybe that's through city council, maybe that's through faculty liaison panels, maybe that's through teachers meetings. We identify the needs and conversations that are going on. We come up with priorities, and we therefore build around those priorities, as opposed to, we're the library, this is what a library should be. Right? This is when Dewey talked about the primary goal of libraries being literacy, he did not mean reading. He meant imposing an Edwardian white male view of what is good literature on a population in a paternalistic way. Right? That's exactly the opposite of what I'm claiming we need to do, which is we still need to worry about quality. We still need to have a voice in what's good information, but we better match it to what the community cares about, or eventually the community won't care about us. So, we can argue more. All right. All about learning. It's a collaborative conversation, meaning it's not just us to them and them to us. And this is really important. This doesn't mean the community tells us exactly what we look at. To be part of a conversation, you need to have a brain, a point of view, and a voice. So libraries should be able to look and say, you know what, I understand all you want is corn and pie in our library. We're not going to do it. And this is the reason we're not going to do it. And by the way, librarians have a professional degree for a reason, which is we're professionals and we have importance to have a voice, not just we manage the materials you tell us to keep. That that library serves as the facilitators of this conversation, and that means sometimes it's with resources, but oftentimes it's not. Every one of you has the story. The story. The story about how you changed someone's life. That story where you walk and go, it was great to be a librarian. Right? It's that story that you hold on to that's near and dear. How many of those stories started with handing someone a book? And how many of them started with asking them, what can I do to help? That conversation, that communication, that interpersonal connection, that human connection is fundamentally what drives you as a librarian. So why do you spend 90% of your time on things that have nothing to do with that conversation? And true facilitation with the community means shared ownership. Here are your stacks, Historical Society. No, we're not going to extension them, and no, we're not going to worry about Mark, and you're going to take care of them and organize them the way your community sees. We ultimately need to invest in tools in creation over collection of artifacts. If what we're talking about is building knowledge, what we're talking about is not warehousing artifacts. We need to be in the knowledge creation business. That means that we need to give them 2 grand pianos on the stage. Means we need to give them the computers that they're so desperate for. And the mission of the library then becomes to facilitate the knowledge creation of its community through conversation. That's an amazing task that we have. That what our job is to improve society, and we do it through conversations. And what's amazing is that libraries are perfectly situated to do it. We're perfectly situated to do this. Libraries functions as authorities, not authoritarians. What does that mean? That means when someone comes in and they ask us a question, we give them the best information for the question. We don't tell them it's a dumb question. So the silly example is when a reporter comes in and asks you for good websites about hate groups using the web to recruit members, the Ku Klux Klan website is a good resource for them. 8th grader looking for an after-school program? Not so much. Right? An authoritarian view is we don't keep information about the Ku Klux Klan because that's bad. Right? But the truth is librarians don't function that way. We have freedom of information is more than just the pie in the sky principle. It means we can't tell you what's the good information for you until you ask us what it is. That's fundamentally what we do. And in doing that, we filter. We provide our values. We provide our training. We talk about good information. We talk about bad information, but doing it based on a need. We're honest brokers and facilities of conversations. We're tool builders. Tool builders. You are a tool builder. When you do a Pathfinder, even if it's a piece of paper that you did on a typewriter, it's a tool. Doing decimal classification is a tool. Your website is a tool. Just because you may not be able to sit there and hack out PHP code with the best of them, though I think we should do more of that, we are still tool builders. Trust me, when you talk to a techie and they start, the line is techies never say no. If you go to IT people and you ask somebody to do it, they'll never say no. What they'll start doing is throwing acronyms at you. Right? Well, we could do that, but then we'd have to have a MySQL database, which is a relational database. We'll have to interface with the LDAP system. The LDAP system will have to tunnel through the IP systems because we have a firewall. And the firewall, that's no. Librarians can match them acronym for acronym. Right? Can we keep our manual to yourself? Well, we could keep the manual, but we have to extension them, and that means we have to use a MARC record. And of course, if we use the MARC record, we're going to have to use the AACR2 and AACR. We can do it, word for word. Ultimately, the value that we provide is we are the connective tissue of our organizations. In an academic library, when the provost talks about interdisciplinary projects, hello, we talk to everyone on the campus. When you talk about the idea of someone coming to the library, they get tax information, they get public health information, they get literature and reading. How many public organizations are there that the community has in such great value that can touch every other part of the community and can be welcomed onto that table? How many people have you read, oh God, it's the library, they suck. We don't have that. We have a very positive impression. Let's use it. But we must be prepared. We must be prepared to be radical change agents. We must fix our innovation cycle. Repeat after me, new hires are not the solution. How many libraries have I walked in and they talked about Betty or Fred or John or Jane? And they're the young librarian. It doesn't matter how old they are, by the way. If they just hired them, they're the young librarian. And when I say, oh, conversation and technology, they always say, oh, well, Betty. What ultimately is happening is we're saying, we hired Betty so we don't need to know that stuff. And so we give the most important thing we do, which is innovation, to the person with the least experience, the least cultural knowledge, the least seniority, and we say, good luck. And what we end up doing is wearing them down till they bang their head against the wall and either submit to the form or they go somewhere else or they beat us. Right? This is wrong. I'm not saying don't hire people. What I'm saying is when that person comes in, that's a perfect time to inventory everyone's skills and figure out how you can bring them all up. We have to fix our education system. I'm a library science professor. I am partly to blame. That's me. There's a whole group of us. Right? But what we do is sometimes what we do is we teach leaders. And that means we give them a grand vision, some techie skills, we throw them to an organization and say good luck. Right? That's not enough. What we need to do is prepare radical change agents who can walk into an environment, assess the environment, assess the strategic need, and begin to undermine everyone in the organization until they do the right thing. We need to prepare people who scare the hell out of us as library science professors who walk 5 years back into our classrooms and say, you got it all wrong, do this now. And we need to listen. We need to fix our innovation economy. Library vendors need to become marketplaces, not full solutions. This idea that somehow the library vendors put this big list of, we'll put wikis in next week, and we'll put tagging in next week, we'll put RSS next week, but it'll be our proprietary solution, it won't talk to anyone else, and you gotta wait till we're done to give it to you, is crap. What we need to realize is that innovation needs to come from everyone, from the company, from vendors, from librarians, and they need to have open APIs so that we can add it. This is for their own good. Library vendors as organizations cannot keep up with innovation. We need to be driving them, and they need to make access so that we can drive them, and good vendors do this. Good vendors partner, don't sell. I'm going to skip this one for now, which is what you can do about it today. Ultimately, there's an obligation of leadership. This is what it comes down to. We have to innovate from core principles, which means we have to know what our core principles are. We have to innovate, not simply saying we adopt, and somewhere in their mix turns into the library of the future.
We need to first define what is the library of the future, adopt what is available to us, and create what doesn't happen. We need to accept this mission to facilitate knowledge, and facilitation is not unbiased and it's not invisible. I like to say that comparing libraries to books is like comparing dentists to drills. It is probably the least sexy thing that they do. It is probably the least important thing that they do, and yet it's what's first in communities' minds. And when we do it really well, you don't notice, right? If you go to the dentist and you walk out without drilling, do you really say, boy, that dentist really helped me? Or do you go, that was a waste, right? Or thank God I didn't get drilled. Librarians are the same way. We need to broadcast our value here, folks. You are the future of the library. You are the future. Not the next hire, not the next guru, not the next talking head on the stage. Every day when you walk into your library and think, how can I do this better? You're the future. And you need to share it. And you can't wait for someone else to tell you what it is. You need to actively engage in that conversation. It drives me nuts when I talk to the Friends board and they talk about having libraries that don't put the Friends to shame, right? The idea that the Friends group is doing more interesting things than the library is. This is wrong. This is bad. We need to be driving innovation on a regular basis, and we need to put in our reporting cycles, and we need to say, every librarian here, whether you're working here for 10 hours, 2 hours, or 80 hours a week, whether you're in cataloging or reference or public service or whatever you're in the innovation business. And every day we need to sit and talk about what do we do better, how do we do it next. And we do this by being proactive, we do this in connections, in tight coupling with our communities, but ultimately it's our responsibility. If libraries are not here in 2010, as that stupid Slate article talked about, it's your fault. It's my fault. It's our fault. No one's going to put us out of business. Hell, Google wants to partner with us most of the time, not put us out of business. We need to define what that core information is. We need to define what the future of libraries is, and we can do it, and we're perfectly situated to do it. There you go. Thank you. Please.
Okay, so that's great, I agree.
Give us the hows. The hows are specifically, part of what I've been doing this year is going from 30,000 to 10, writing the starter kit, so wait for the book. No. The short answer is one, to begin tomorrow to map out your communities. So this is the slide that I switched. One is to engage. Challenge every speaker, including me, and if you don't get a chance today, you send an email, but every speaker you come to today. Go through this website, you can comment, give us all this information. We have this thing called conversants. But here's one I think is really interesting. Real scenarios, real responses. How many times, take every question that you've ever gotten that you think is stupid, ignorant, or whatever about why is your library important, and come up with a specific response to it. But beyond that, what you need to begin doing is mapping out the conversations of your communities. So have focus groups with, first of all, the people who walk in the building and say, not how do you like the library, what do you think about the library? It's the wrong question. What are you talking about, what's important in your life? And how do you organize the information? I found that that question, how do you organize your information, get you a really good start. It's really practical and they can think about it. But it turns into, they begin telling you what they're organizing and what they do with that information and what they value that information. So if you're in a public library, that might start with community groups that you have strong relations and partnerships with. If you're in an academic library, I'd say this probably your bibliographers or your staff liaisons, where you don't walk into the faculty meeting and say, what do you think of the library? You walk in and say, what are the conversations, what are you talking about on the water cooler on your listserv today? Just to begin mapping out what they are. And literally, mapping out. Here's the community, here's what they're talking about. You can then go through and begin to say, what for each one of these steps do I care about as a strategic direction? So, the faculty is talking about they don't have enough open access journals, or they're being required to put open access, but they don't get peer review out of it. Is this a part of the conversation library can form? Yes. How? And you can begin to map out how your services are meeting the conversations as opposed to outcomes, gate counts. Gate counts just means someone walked into the building, right? What you really want to know is what's your specific impact. So that mapping exercise is step number one, I think. Step number two is to really ask the question. It sounds, I'm amazed as I talk to faculties and libraries, when I say you need to have a conversation about what is the future of the library, how reluctant people are to have it until you get started. Because it sounds like frankly, a bogus waste of time over another navel-gazing exercise. But if you really went and said, in 5 years, this is what our library is going to look like, and some of you have done that through a strategic planning process, that's an interesting conversation. So those are some, and then technically, I think the answer is, we've got some ideas on how you redesign catalogs today, please. There's some technical systems you can be building and experimenting with, but all of that comes from what are the conversations going on in your community and how can you impact them.
But suppose you work for a library that's merely associated with the city or community. How?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to give me a little bit more specific.
Well, for instance, the library where I work is called an associated library because over half of its funding comes from a private trust rather than from the public taxation.
Yep.
So this process you're outlining today would obviously enhance our association with the city. The fact remains, most of our funding is still private, so would we have to go to outside financing to, once we begin these conversations with the community as to the needs?
The question is, once you can identify, first of all, who you want to serve. You want to serve those outside constituencies, right? So what communities do we want to serve, just as an outcome, right? So what do those communities want to serve? Begin to identify what those things are, and then you do have to line up what resources do we have then to provide, right? If it's not tax dollars, it's private sources. This has been really interesting. So in Philadelphia, they have to raise $175 million from individual donors. And when they go and ask them, there are two arguments that don't work for them. The first argument is, give to those who don't have. Individual donors want a legacy and they want somebody to give, and so that's not good enough for them, which is a sad state of society. And the other one is, the library would be cool because they didn't necessarily have specific activities. What I found with funders is they want specific, they want new. Even if it's not, you got to bundle it new. And then they want to know what exactly, what's the benefit and the outcome that comes out of it. And you can do that if you understand this is the community, this is why the community is important, this is what they're talking about, this is our anticipated effect, which you can't do if you just say, this is our service population, and this is our usage. So I think making the funding argument is going to depend on each case, but it's going to have to come into specific, how am I going to improve this community that we care about? Other questions or comments?
David, what are some of the current sources for a lot of the ideas that you come up with in your presentations and in your research? Does it come out of business? Does it come out of higher education? Like, what are some of your sources of inspiration right now?
The primary source of information, the foundation is theoretical, which is this conversation theory. And when I say theory, people tend to go, oh God, another academic from the Ivy League. But here's when I said you can't be unbiased. When you're presented with a new situation, you can either look at it as a brand new situation which you don't know what to do with, or you can have a basis for decision making. So theory is just a way of explaining and predicting what we should do. So a lot of this conversation theory about how people create knowledge coming out of the education community and scaffolding, which is some academic literature, I think is really important. And you notice I didn't give you I give like 20 of these, and go to the PT website, PT Bed website, you can see them. I do like, this is how a virtual reference system might look like. Boom, boom, boom. Here's how a reserve system might look like. And so there's some software ideas. Those software ideas get inspired a lot from this reading 56 RSS feeds a day stuff. But at least I have a filter so it's not like everything is new and cool, right? We have to be careful that we don't get into the spangly, bright bird objects. Ooh, look, it's new. Ooh, look, it's new, and jump at each one. You have to have I want you to play, I want you to experiment, I want you to try things out and not worry about how it gets implemented, seriously. But I want you to, in a month into that process, to stop and say, okay, now, how does this match this framework of how it helped my community? So play with all of what's coming out of industry, Twitter, and all that other stuff. But realize that you need to stop at some point and say, this is why it matters. So there's two different phases, play and evaluation. And sometimes we forget both of them. Sometimes we just play and never figure out how to use it. And sometimes we just look at things and dismiss it because we just say, oh, Twitter, doesn't matter. Where does it? It doesn't. One last question, yeah.
Actually, I wanted to thank you because I thought it was losing my mind a few years ago because I started these conversations. I'm an academic institution. And actually going out and beating on the doors going, what do you need from us? what I learned from that was not just a cafe and library, but a piano, which is arriving at the end of this week, because we need performance space. Discovered that we also needed having a center for complexity built within the library, because my reference staff is on the main floor. What a perfect combination. That led to a center of centers where it's shared space. And I want to thank you, because I thought my staff at one point went, oh my gosh, she's going out public again.
Can I ask where you are?
University of Hartford. Crazy place.
Very good. I'd love to hear more about it. Thank you all very much. I kept you to that. Okay, the slides and hopefully